really have started to hate The Boys. This show has always had serious issues. It was never the groundbreaking satire it pretends to be. The main issue that bugs me about this show is that I really don't care about anything that happens. And I think that's one of the worst things the show can do. I don't care about the characters or the plot or who lives or dies. I don't feel happy when the good guys succeed or angry when the bad guys win. I just don't feel anything because everything about this show feels so mechanical. It's not like I'm immersed in this world and watching amazing characters on these crazy journeys. It's like I'm watching a puppet show and you can see the strings. It's not strictly about emotional connection either. Like, I'm not asking to fall in love with these characters. I'm thinking about season 1 of Westworld where I wasn't emotionally connected to those characters, but I was genuinely interested in their stories and journeys. It's also probably why I didn't make it past the first episode of season 2, and no spoilers, but once you have that type of finale, where do you even go? Not every show needs to make you feel super deeply about the characters, especially with something like Westworld, where it's more about self-discovery and most of the characters are androids, but The Boys very clearly tries to make you like all their main characters, and I just don't give a damn. The characters are all so textbook in the worst way possible. They don't feel original, multidimensional, or fresh. Yeah, Butcher has some interesting dialogue, but he's really just a dude with a tragic backstory. And let's be real, that's literally all the characters in this show. None of them really move in any sort of forward progression, and neither does the plot. We're not watching an organic story develop. It's more like the writers need to hit XYZ topics related to the real world, and they just make up random formulaic character arcs to fit the plot instead of developing them together in tandem. In addition to Butcher's very typical anti-hero style writing, Huey and Starlight are just these textbook good guys. And normally I don't have an issue with good guy characters. I love characters that are genuinely good people, unflinching or even struggling with and rising above adversity. But these two characters don't feel like that. They feel like these basic stand-ins for the audience. Season 1 Huey was the sort of plot vehicle, the catalyst for the show. Season 2 Huey I've completely forgotten about. And season 3 Huey was probably the worst because they invented this whole thing about him being self-conscious about Annie having powers, even though he said in season 1 it didn't bother him. And you could tell then that it genuinely didn't. They could have explored his interest in powers organically, but instead they made up some crap to give him a superficial character arc that culminated in a single moment of helping Starlight reach her full potential. It's like they're thinking, this is the problem he's gonna have this season, and then we'll have a scene at the end where he resolves that. Annie could have had more of a character journey since she spent 3 seasons caught between being in the 7 and helping out the boys, but she's genuinely so boring. What's her personality? She's one of the good guys? She can stand up to the bad guys and call them out? She has this whole thing with religion that gets explored in a season 1 episode, and then later in the season she renounces religion when she finds out about Compound V, and that's it. This religion thing felt like it was there for commentary, not like it was part of this real person who was struggling with a long-held belief system. Season 3 scene that shows her clenching her fist behind her back as a coping mechanism. Like, this is so corny and manufactured. While Huey exists to be the audience's eyes into the boy side of things, Annie exists to show us that Vought isn't what it looks like on the outside. These characters just don't feel like real people occupying this real world. And I'm not talking about realistic to our world. I know many people conflate those ideas. What's tricky is that because the world is just a superhero version of ours, it can feel more immersive overall than it actually is. Not that I was immersed personally, because I did watch the first 3 seasons kind of passively, which honestly should have been the first warning sign, but because the world is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, the writers treat the characters like cogs in a machine to carry out the plot within this world. And I really hate how they do their character arcs in a way that feels so artificially manufactured. It shouldn't feel like watching a bunch of mechanically executed character arcs each season. You should feel like you're watching real people grow and evolve due to various circumstances and relationships with the people around them. The other characters have always been a problem for me as well. Like, honestly, I genuinely hate Frenchie. I always have. His dialogue was always so try-hard, his backstory and guilt is super boring. I may have liked Kimiko if they gave her any depth, but just like Frenchie, she has the exact same storyline every single season where she feels trapped by her past and has to get over it. It's like she only exists so they could find out about what Vought was doing with Compound V, and then they just had to give her something to do each season. Ryan's just a kid, but he mostly feels like a plot vehicle for Butcher and Homelander. And MM sometimes seems to have a bit more going on since he lost his family due to his devotion to the boys, but ultimately he's just a guy who has stuff happen to him. Like, it just so happens that his ex-wife is uncharacteristically dating his polar opposite, who happens to become a Homelander fanatic. And the Soldier Boy stuff, while it makes sense that this happened to his family, it still feels like MM is only in the story because of these specific plot reasons and not because the writers had this deep need to have this particular character. And it's the same way for the rest of the boys. I don't know if this makes sense, but you know how some stories have characters that are genuinely irreplaceable? Thinking of examples that most people probably know, you can't replace Frodo in Lord of the Rings with some other hobbit who has to take the ring to Mordor, or Bilbo from The Hobbit with some other hobbit who has to help the dwarves. They feel like they exist outside of the plot of those stories, and while we are following them on journeys that change them, at the end of the day, it has to be them. The plot lines and backstories for the main crew and the boys could have been given to completely different people. Like, A-Train could have killed some other guy's girlfriend, the Seven could have accepted someone other than Starlight, they could have recruited some other ex-assassin chemist, etc. Because these characters are so defined by the plot, you could replace them with Louis, Franny, and Spanishy, and the plot would still unfold the exact same way. And as typical as he seems, only Butcher probably couldn't be replaced, and I think that's because he still feels like he exists outside of his corny-ass backstory. And ironically, even though he's entirely driven and consumed by his mission to get Homelander, it feels intrinsic enough to avoid the manufacturing on very few occasions. Again, I don't know if any of that made sense. This particular aspect aspect is kind of hard to explain, but hopefully I managed to be clear. As for the bad guys, the Deep honestly sucks. Yes, his character does show how cancel culture doesn't really work to cancel celebrities and how they lie about changing and then come back, but it's just filler if we're being honest. Like, who cares? He pretty much only exists to be commentary and to be a villain, especially to Starlight. You can't make me care about the good guys just by making their oppositional forces suck. And in a similar vein, you can't make bad guys more interesting just by giving them tragic backstories. The way Homelander behaves in season 1 does have its moments, like slicing off the plane in episode 1 and then abandoning the other one, but I always hated the milk obsession and the mommy issues because that's so manufactured and weird. I would have had no problem if they just stuck to the villainy, but their attempt to add depth by giving him this sob story about how he's a lab rat with no mommy or daddy actually makes it worse. Backstory doesn't just magically give someone depth. Depth comes from seeing how a character exists in the world and if it feels like they're more than a vehicle for the plot. Trying to explain why he turned out like this isn't the depth we needed, and especially making it about, oh, he had no family so he's desperate to be loved and worshipped. That's just dumb and unnecessary. Plus, the really terrible people and leaders are usually the way they are because their parents were just like them. That's the real danger. Their entitlement and need to be in control is explanation enough for why they seek power. Not to say there aren't any cases where that sort of backstory wouldn't have panned out, but in this case, it just sucks. Then there's the whole Stormfront relationship they gave him, which was literally so annoying and it just felt like a plot point because Stormfront being exposed led to him getting sidelined in the 7, and her dying when she was the last person who worshipped him was why he flew off the handle, and it's also manufactured. Like, this is not organic storytelling. And I know everyone loves season 3, but it's really not good. Homelander talking to himself in the mirror was stupid, Noir having animated characters talk to him was stupid, and even season 4's Noir just wasn't that good. There's Soldier Boy, who I didn't really care about, and the whole working with the lesser evil to take out the bigger evil could have worked if literally any other show did it, because again, there's no depth to anything that's happening. It's literally just plot. And then there's Victoria Newman, who definitely had potential, but they took her out without really letting her do anything notable after season 2's head-popping extravaganza, and even that was a bunch of nonsense to drag out the storyline. Her season 4 moment of telling billionaires they run the world and the masses are stupid, I was like, why are you saying this to the billionaires as if they're the audience? It's so forced. Also, I hate that in every scene where they try to show her as an oppositional force to the boys, they just make her randomly snarky. Like, that's so out of character. And beyond the main cast, all the newbies for each season were really just plot devices. Stormfront exists to push Homelander over the edge, Soldier Boy is the stoic dude with a built-in weapon, Firecracker is just a stand-in for real-life figures, and Sage is just carrying out these plans. They gave her a weakness too, which is good, I guess, but it's so cookie-cutter, it feels like they just threw that in there for plot purposes. The only character who actually felt like a real human being was Maeve, and I think that's because they just let her be. She wasn't really a principal character, so they weren't trying to force these character arcs with her. She just happens to exist in this world and occasionally came into the storyline when it organically made sense. Even when they did use her for the plot, she still felt like a real person. The last character I have to mention, of course, is A-Train, because honestly, I really don't find A-Train all that interesting. I see what the show's trying to do with his character. He took extreme measures to be what Vought wanted him to be and then changed direction after the Blue Hawk stuff, but also, just like with everyone else in the show, I don't care. And no amount of fake movie scenes with the director telling him to act more black is gonna change that. Again, he doesn't feel like a real person. He feels like a character that only exists because the writers wanted to poke fun at Hollywood's fake wokeness and tell a story about a black celebrity caught between having this life of fame and fortune versus staying true to himself and the community he's supposed to represent, which wouldn't be an issue if they actually did it right. The Black Lives Matter stuff with Blue Hawk felt so forced, like it was so minimal effort for them to just have people in the room shouting Black Lives Matter instead of actually trying to show the impact and crafting a real story reflecting police brutality. The political commentary is just so surface level, like, yeah, it's technically accurate, but that's because they're just taking what happens in real life and doing direct adaptations. All the far-right crowd saying the show ruined itself by going woke are obviously wrong because the commentary hasn't changed since day one. And I even made that season 4 video in part to reject the notion that the show got more political, because that was always the case. But that's the problem with bad faith criticism. It can be distracting and cover up genuine issues. These people claim that criticizing topics like Christian supremacy and right-wing extremism are what make the show bad, and that shows these days are too political, which they think detracts from good storytelling. They say their issue isn't the commentary and that it's the writing of the commentary, but these people think that the bad writing in question is just including commentary in the first place. Not only has TV been political since its inception, but this show could have discussed all these things without sucking. And the reverse is true as well. I guess you can call it unchecked praise, praising something just because it discusses some important issues. The way everyone said season 2 was great for making fun of the fake girl power stuff that corporations like Disney do with Marvel, and how at the end with the female superheroes beating up Stormfront, that's what real girl power looks like. But honestly, it's still just as corny as the stuff they're making fun of. And it especially feels disingenuous when you remember Stormfront telling Starlight that if she was the one getting a dick shoved in her face, she'd bite it off. And it's not like the show's using that moment to foreshadow she'll turn out to be a terrible person. Like, they were definitely trying to use her to teach Annie this quote-unquote feminist lesson. And that's why there's kind of a bad taste in my mouth, because I feel like the show's constantly trying to pat itself on the back despite their bare minimum or even below minimum effort. That's what the season 4 ending felt like, as if the writers were desperate to live in a dystopia so they could feel important and live out their Hunger Games rebellion fantasy, especially especially with showrunner Eric Kripke's quote about season 5 being an apocalypse, as if he's salivating at the prospect of the main characters being oppressed, and considering that after the 2020 election it was the other side doing more than marching on Washington on January 6th, and season 4 directly referencing that date as the in-show assassination run on Singer, it has this really weird feeling of the writers trying to live vicariously through their characters so they can feel like activists. In my other video I said I wasn't surprised about season 4 ending that way because of how Harry Potter went apocalyptic in their second to last installment, but it's not even the same feeling because in The Boys it's more like, ooh yeah, look at this fake badass ending with Nirvana in the background, while in Harry Potter it's like, crap, innocent people are dying, Voldemort's literally winning, everything's gone to hell. Everything about season 4 was so performative, and I think it unlocked how performative this show has always been, because the plot was never this level of atrocious, and given that this is a show you only really watch for the plot, that's gonna raise some red flags. It took me back to season 2's Stormfront storyline because it's weird how literal they made it, like she's quite literally the capital N. Eric Kripke said they were telling a story about the intersection of celebrity and authoritarianism and how social media and entertainment are used to sell fascism. What the hell are you talking about? How entertainment is used to sell fascism? Boys isn't showing us how social media and entertainment are selling fascism beyond Stormfront having a meme team, and VOT showing us what it would be like if Fox News controlled Hollywood. For a show that loves to pull from headlines, they don't really do a good job providing effective commentary that makes sense. Obviously the show does portray about how some yapping about saving the country will turn people into your cult followers, but it doesn't so much explore the way it's intentionally used to distract from issues facing the populace and how this extremism actually stems. And they couldn't warn about the threat of fascism without bringing in an actual Aryan lover. It just says, hey, remember Germany? Here's a person from that period and ideology trying to turn our country into that. And that's problematic because our country has always had racists and white supremacists and genocide, even inspiring the big H-man himself. So you don't need a German nationalist from the 1940s to fuel that underlying prejudice. And again with Harry Potter, which is made for a PG-13 audience, though they did have imagery that resembled that era of Germany, that's because Voldemort and the Death Eaters were literally inspired by Germany's white supremacist fanatics. So contextually it makes sense when the warning is about how such a regime can develop by utilizing existing racial prejudices and scapegoating marginalized communities in a quest for power. And look, I get even Marvel had Hydra and Red Skull, and though I haven't been familiar with any Marvel stuff for years at this point, it's no secret that the original Marvel comics as well as DC were highly political. They just did it without feeling so fake. There was this one scene in season 2 where they show this guy getting radicalized bit by bit until he shoots an innocent brown man at a cash register, and technically it's a good way of showing how dangerous Stormfront's rhetoric was, but the show moves on from that really quickly and it didn't really have any depth. It's like the writers were expecting this horrible nature of what happened to carry its weight in terms of the storytelling, and so they didn't bother with crafting that part of the story at all. That's because they're like, I want to talk about this, so I'll craft the plot and characters around this. Now, this isn't inherently a problem. Almost nothing is inherently a problem. It all depends on execution, right? That's my philosophy anyway. In general, I love to see shows that craft their stories and plots in conjunction with themes that they explore and characters that experience their world. But this show isn't really doing any of that. They're not organically following real feeling characters that are deeply rooted in a world wrapped in these themes. Eric Kripke said the show is very punk rock and they never want to sacrifice that, but dude, I don't think you know what punk rock is. Tacking on God Save the Queen at the beginning of season 4 and Nirvana at the end doesn't make your show punk rock. And look, I praise the use of heart-shaped box in my video, but that's because the song kicks ass. Even with the music saving grace, the season 4 ending had me rolling my eyes. Like, they got captured. Big deal. The Boys is the TV equivalent of Sid Vicious wearing that famous swastika shirt, trying to be shocking and edgy, like, just shut up and play your damn bass. Is punk rock supposed to explain the massive amounts of degeneracy from these soups? Cause my god, we get it. These people are bad. The attempted shock in this show is just too much. Like, you can't use this edgy faux rebellious surface layer as a replacement for crafting stories with authentic characters that generate real emotion. I think it's why I love The Last Kingdom so much. That show exemplified the theme of how hate and prejudice and cultural religious division can literally perpetuate so much cyclical violence over multiple generations. But they show you this by developing these characters who navigate this divided world over decades of their lives. And we see how that affects them and how they interact with that world. The Boys just doesn't do that. When have we ever felt like any of the gang are super personally affected by what's going on? Sure, there's Huey's girlfriend and Becca Butcher and MM's dad's family and Kimiko's brother, but these all feel like plot points that exist only to justify why these guys joined the Boys in the first place. The Last Kingdom's ability to make you feel and care so much is really unmatched, whether you would die for these characters or you hate them so much. But even when you really hate someone for 3 seasons and then they make you like them by showing how they change and grow, they don't feel like somebody wrote their character arcs. They feel like real people who are going through struggles and genuinely growing as people. And because you're able to feel for them, you deeply understand the overall thematic problems. Similarly, Black Sails is about a bunch of pirates, and no spoiler, but there's a character who sort of facilitates the assault of a woman by his men, and you'd think, man, screw this guy, he sucks. But somehow, the show ends up making you actually care about him, and he becomes super compelling. Like, that's when a show really deserves praise. Not for redeeming bad guys, I want to be clear. I wouldn't even say they tried to redeem him, but just the way these stories are told, like, we actually care what's going on, and the characters really seem to exist as real people within the show's anti-colonial backdrop, which then helps you understand the underlying context. The Boys is more like you're watching a PSA telling you to beware political and corporate leaders. Every ounce of this show just feels like they're trying too hard. Like, ooh, look at us, we're so badass for subverting genres and criticizing society. Good for you? Forget punk rock, this show feels clinical more than anything. It also feels like the writers don't really have a good grasp on the various topics they're discussing because they're unable to explore them critically through story. The Blacklist did a much better job of exploring topics related to government and corporate corruption, and Raymond Reddington was way more punk rock than Butcher could ever be. Not that I would ever voluntarily describe anything as punk rock beyond actual punk rock, but this show wasn't afraid to be critical of our government structures like the CIA and the actual presidential office itself, including its own assassination-based plotline, as well as deep-rooted police corruption or governments of other countries or multinational corporations, though they did have their limitations, which is a conversation for another day.
Multinational corporations and criminals run the world.
But whereas The Blacklist was dictated by its story, and later on the dragging out of that story, The Boys is dictated by its commentary. But even that wouldn't have been a problem if they did it right. When It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia has a commentary-based episode, it actually works because the writers genuinely grasped these issues. Episodes like Time's Up for the Gang Goes Jihad, and Reynolds vs. Reynolds are some top-notch examples of the writers really understanding the way people, politics, and society works. Plus, the degeneracy in this show actually has a point. That's who the Patty's Gang is. That's how they ruin other people's lives and live their own lives. People don't watch the show to be like, oh my god, look at how shockingly these people behave. They watch the show because the way they behave is funny and interesting. That's why the episodes without degeneracy and commentary still hold up, because the show's DNA isn't built on either. It's built on these 5 core characters and their shenanigans. First watched The Boys because I was really just casually watching to see what's going on, what's the commentary, what's happening next, yet somehow I always knew I would never rewatch this show. Rewatch factor is important to me because it generally gives me a good idea of how good a show is. It's not always a strict rule because there's some stuff I can say did well for itself, but I would never watch it again because of subject matter or premise, for instance. But with this show, the fact that I literally do not care about a single character and the plot is so boring and cyclical and the commentary is something I can just get by reading the news, that says a lot. There would be no enjoyment in rewatching this show, no new insights, no sense of caring, and the bit that I had to rewatch while editing that other video was genuinely a slog because what I was watching was really not good. Though to truly understand how much I dislike this show and break down everything that's wrong with it piece by piece, I would have to watch it again from the start. But I have absolutely no drive to do that, and I think that tells me enough. The Boys doesn't feel like a show about human beings. It doesn't feel like you're immersed in a story. Instead, it feels like you're watching the opposite of a well-oiled machine where you can see the writers pulling puppet strings behind the curtain, and that's probably the worst quality a show can have. Now, you might be wondering, am I still going to tune in for season 5? I feel like a lot of the big shows people watch, we watch just out of curiosity for the plot to see what happens next, and by the time we realize it sucks, we might as well stick to our guns and just finish it. But some of it also has to do with the shared culture phenomenon, which I'll be talking about soon. So in the meantime, I'm Harry, and this was Trash Talk Reverse.